So hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this event on photo ethics with Smita Sharma. Smita, who is joining us from her home in Delhi. So my name is Alice Chota, and I'm currently the Communications and Knowledge Exchange Manager for the REACH program at the University of Oxford. REACH is a program funded by the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office in the UK, and working to improve water security for people affected by poverty in Africa and South Asia. And through my work, I take and I use images a lot, including currently working on a participatory photography project with Dr. Catherine Gresham, who is here today and who is co-organizing this series with me. And by working on this project, I've really come to question my own practice in terms of how to engage with the people that are being photographed, especially in vulnerable context. How can I do that in a more ethical way, and also in terms of representation? And Catherine and I have had multiple conversations around that, and I've been engaging with other people on the topic, which prompted us to begin this series on photo ethics, where we're inviting different people who have experiences with photography. And in fact, I am now sharing a slide with our upcoming events. I should say that some of the events are exclusively focused on the ethics of photography, but others are focused on perhaps more broadly on the ethics of development work. We have events until April, but there will be more coming up afterwards. And if you're interested in signing up to these events, please email me here at alice.chotar@ouce.ox.ac.uk and we'll sign you up to the mailing list. So I'm extremely excited to welcome you today. There's so many of you joining, and also there's so many of you coming from diverse professions. We have researchers, we have students, we have journalists, we have editors, we have funders, and we also have professionals working in NGOs around humanitarian and international development issues. And what links us all today is that we all, in one way or another, we're all involved with images, whether we take them ourselves or whether we use them or commission them. And we use images because we recognize that they play a really important role in communicating the work that we do, raising awareness about certain issues, raising money sometimes, communicating back to our funders, encouraging people to act, and engaging our audiences more generally. In the meantime, there's been an increasing debate around the ethics of photography in terms of how we engage with the people that we photograph, especially in vulnerable context, and also how we represent them and the narratives that this can create. So this is partly why we, as I mentioned at the start, Catherine and I started this series, and I'm incredibly delighted to bring Smita Sharma for this conversation today. So we pre-recorded this conversation. My internet is a little bit unstable sometimes, so I wanted to make sure that we could have a smooth conversation. It's about 30 minutes long, and there will be 30 minutes for questions at the end. Please do share them in the chat during the talk, and we will come back to them afterwards. I had to edit it slightly because it was originally more than 30 minutes. So you might notice a few edits here and there. Apologies for the photographers who would have probably done a much better job than me. So I will now introduce Smita Sharma, who is our speaker. And I will now read her biography, which I do not know by heart. But Smita is an independent photojournalist and visual storyteller whose work primarily focuses on human rights, gender, crime, and social issues. Her work has been published in various places like National Geographic magazine, the New York Times, BBC World, Time, Channel 4, amongst many others. Smita has exhibited and shown her work across the globe, including the UN headquarters in New York. She's a Getty Image grantee and an International Women's Media Foundation reporting fellow. Smita is a graduate from the Photojournalism and Documentary Photography program of the International Center of Photography in New York. And she has a postgraduate diploma in journalism from the University of Pune. So I really enjoyed my conversation with Smita. We talked a lot about her approach to photography, how she engages with the people she photographs, how she protects their identity, and also her reflections on capturing, maintaining the dignity of the people she photographed. So here we are. I will now start sharing my screen to share the conversation, and we will come back to you afterwards for questions. Thank you. Hello, Smita. Wonderful to have you here today. How are you doing?
Hi, Alice. I'm doing good. Thank you. How are you?
Good. Yes. No, really looking forward to this conversation. So maybe to begin, I wonder if you could talk us through the kind of work that you do and your approach to photography. And you can show a few pictures if you'd like to give us a flavor.
All right. So I am a photojournalist, and my work is mostly the work that I take personally is of investigative nature, focusing on human rights, gender, crime, and social issues. So I have a very tiny presentation, and I'm going to share my screen. So these are just a few images from different projects and assignments that I've done, throughout my work. And this is an image from Central African Republic. This was done on assignment for Human Rights Watch on sexual slavery, women who were kept as sex slaves and who were used as a weapon of war. And these are just two images from that project that I'm showing now. This is from India. This was a story about robber gangs in the state of Jharkhand, which is a very, it's a state with huge population, poverty issues, and a lot of crime in that region. This was again an assignment for Human Rights Watch. This was about girls' education, girls who were barred from education, pregnant girls actually, from from continuing their education in Kenya, and this was in Western Kenya. This is the continuation of the same project. This is about child marriage, and this is basically about girls from a region where child marriage is really huge, very high. This is from my personal project called Not My Shame, which is on rape and sexual violence in India. And this is finally my latest work for National Geographic, which was on child sex trafficking between India and Bangladesh. And this is the last image. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Smita. These are really, really strong and beautiful images, but also very difficult images. And I wonder if you could share your thoughts on why and how photography can be a powerful tool to bring to light these issues.
Well, photography is, I consider it as a moment of, it's a tiny moment that is recorded, and that can stay for forever. It's a documentation that can be a part of history. For example, last year the crisis about Black Lives Matter, the images that were made about the protest and about what happened in US, 50 years down the line, these images are going to be a testament. It's going to testify against what happened during this time, or the pandemic which is happening now. We are in this terrible and difficult situation, and how are we working? You from your home, I from my home. So I think there's a lot of power in photography, and also photography has the ability to change people's mindset about certain issues that they are not aware of. It can engage people, it can start a dialogue, and I think it has the ability to change mindset. Yeah.
Hmm. And what kinds of, or how do you want your audience to feel when they view your images, and what do you want to leave them with?
My intention has always been about informing about certain things that they know. Sometimes they don't know about it, and even if they know about something, for example, child marriage or sex trafficking, people are aware of it. But what they might not know is about the local nuances, the small stories that they might not be aware of, and these are important things, I think, in storytelling. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'd like now to talk about the process of taking images. And you work with, very people who are in very vulnerable contexts, who have gone through traumatic experiences. How do you approach them, and how do you engage with them from the moment that you sort of, get close to them and tell them that you'd like to photograph?
So, the work that I undertake on my own, the first thing that I do is I engage in a lot of research. I study a lot. If it's about a different country, I read about the country's history. If there is a previous war, the politics of the country, the law, about the certain issue. I think it's very important to be prepared about what happened and what's going on before actually going to the place to photograph. Photography comes later. And the question about engaging, I think the first process is about honesty. You go and meet somebody that you don't know. I think you're really lucky if people take you in, because they can tell you no, and they have the right to say no. They are doing you a favor by allowing you into their lives. So you have that privilege, and I think it's a great privilege to be allowed into people's lives and to hear stories and conversations that they are willing to share with you. And the first step, after research and when you're there, would be to just talk to people and understand who they are, and then share about your own work and why you are there. What is your intention? What is your aim? What do you ultimately want to gain, through your photographs? What is the aim? Is it about awareness? Are you working on some issue because you want to change government policies about something, or you want to put pressure on the government, or you simply just want to work on something just to you know shed light on it? So, but even if people are not really educated, because I've worked in a lot of places where people have never been to school, I think if you're honest and if you talk to them, if you explain, people get it. It's not that people don't understand. You just have to understand their mindset, where they are coming from, their questions, and answer them.
And are there any risks for the people that you photograph? Are there any risks for them of having their photographs taken?
Yes, in certain projects that I've worked, yes, there were certain risks. For example, the project Not My Shame, on sexual violence and rape. You know how women are viewed in certain countries. And when I was working on this very highly sensitive issue, first of all, it's just not the girl who is ostracized and shamed, it's also her family. And as a journalist, if I'm going to somebody's house in a village, I don't want to single them out from the community and victimize them further, because people are curious, people want to know why you're there. And I am not from the rural areas, and people know that I'm an outsider, I'm not a part of their community, even if my skin color could be the same. So I think my process is not to just single out that particular family, but to go around the community, speak to the people, you know, let that curiosity die down. I don't have to tell them why exactly I'm there. I can tell them that I'm working on women's hygiene, or I'm doing a research about sanitation, blah blah blah. You know, especially when you talk about menstruation and women's hygiene, the men leave you alone because they really get embarrassed. So this has been my process. And the intention is because I want to protect the family that I'm photographing. You know, it's important for me to protect them while I'm photographing them, but it's also important to protect them after I'm gone.
In your work, you do a wonderful job at not showing the women's faces in many of your assignments where, you know, it's a sensitive subject to protect their identity. I wonder if there's anything else that you do to protect their identity and make sure that their anonymity is maintained.
um, you know, I think there are some things that we need to be mindful. One of the thing is giving out the location. You know, I would be very careful about photographing someone near a street sign or some kind of a shop which gives the street address, because then somebody can locate that person. You know, having said that, I'm not talking about photographing a street scene or a landscape or anything. But if you're talking about a particular topic, which is really sensitive and you want to protect people, just be mindful about where you're photographing. I have taken photographs of girls outside their homes or on the streets, but they have been images which is, you know, in front of a forest or a paddy field, or in front of a brick wall, and half the country looks like that. You know, so there is no way that somebody could go and locate her from there. So these are things that, you know, I've been very careful, not just the subject who's standing in front of me, the person who's standing in front that I'm photographing, but also the other visual elements in the frame. Having said that, I just want to mention an example that you know, about an assignment that I did for Human Rights Watch, which was in Central African Republic on documenting former sex slaves. I've shown two images from that in my, today in the presentation. So when we started working, you know, I was working with a team of a researcher and a video journalist. And the researcher, she was working there for 2 years, and she was really close to the women. Uh, and she was very scared of us photographing them, and she just wanted us to take silhouette. And she's from the development sector, you know, she's a researcher, she's a policy, you know, she helps in making policies, and she doesn't want to understand the visual uh, uh, grammar so well. I'm not saying she doesn't understand, but you know, um, she was she didn't want us to take photograph other than silhouettes. And then I just asked her why, what is the reason. Because it's important for me to show the personality of the women, not just the black silhouette. And then she said that, you know, some of the women are so poor that they just have one or two set of clothes, and I don't want them to be identified by their clothes. And I think it was a very important point, a very very valid point. And then I understood her fear, and then I had to do this uh, problem solving, like how do I solve this problem, what do I do. So I spoke to a local producer who was working with us, and then I asked him, like, is there a market where you can go and buy some clothes or buy some fabric? And because all the women, they had different, you know, they had different shapes, and it was very difficult to get dresses. So I asked him, just get 2 meters each of lots of fabrics that you can find, transparent, translucent, you know, cotton fabrics, and get me tons of safety pins. So he came back with tons of piles of clothes. And we, you know, the women that we photographed, that I photographed, like uh, we dressed them with those fabrics, you know. and we photographed them. So the problem was solved. The researcher Hillary was really happy. She was like, okay, now you can take photographs. I don't have a problem. So I think these are things that sometimes can be, I'm not sure, it could be risky for people. So just be mindful about such situations. Yeah.
I like this idea that the photographer is also a problem solver. So
I think I just want to say this thing. Photography, I think, is just 30 or 40% of the work that we do. The other thing is, problem solving, access, talking,
research.
communication, research. Yeah, those are 60% work.
So what did you do with the clothes afterwards that you used?
Good question. So we had tons of clothes. So the clothes that the women wore, we took it. We brought it as a memento. I have some at home. And some of the clothes that were not used, we gave it to them.
Can you talk about what the issue is with silhouettes? Because we have a lot of some of our audience members who aren't photographers or editors per se, so they may not be aware of some of those issues.
So there is not a problem with silhouettes, but a silhouette is just a black image, of somebody's face or somebody's body form. It doesn't say anything about the person or her personality or his personality. And as a photographer, as a visual journalist, it's very important to show the other elements. Even if you don't show a face, you can show other things, right? You can show the hands, you can show the body language, the way she's sitting or standing, the way he's moving his arms. There are so many things that the gesture, and there's so many things that it can talk, which I think is important to document. Silhouette is boring.
And when you engage with people, they might be wondering where their images will appear afterwards. There's, you can't necessarily control where the images will be showed afterwards. Once it's on the internet, then it can easily circulate. How do you manage that when people ask you when is the photo going to be shown?
I think, again, the first question that you asked about how do you get access or how do you talk to people when you're photographing them, I do explain it to them. And, we all have a smartphone. It's not so difficult to show them. I open my Instagram, I open my Twitter, and I always say that, it is going to go on print on a magazine, but it will also be online. It perhaps could come on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. People in many regions in developing nations, they use Facebook. It's so common, and also in India, people use a lot of WhatsApp. They use WhatsApp to share images and videos. They circulate a lot of things. So I explain it to them that there is a huge possibility that it will go there. So I am going to take a photograph in a certain way that you will not be seen. And when I photograph them, sometimes I show them examples. I turn the camera and then I show them, like, look, this is what I'm going to show. So there is a level of trust that, of course, has to be built. Otherwise the work cannot progress. There has to be that mutual understanding and trust.
And maybe getting into more of the nitty gritty of how you take the image, do you usually tell them how you want to take their image, or do they also guide you as to how they would like to be portrayed?
So, the ethics of photojournalism, there are certain do's and don'ts. I cannot, for example, if I want to take the daily life and if I have something in mind that, okay, she's in a paddy field and she's cutting the crops, I cannot tell her that, will you be doing this for me so that I can get the photograph? That is wrong. That is unethical. But if I ask her that, what is your daily chores? She can say that I get up at 7 in the morning and then, I do this, I collect milk, from the cows, and then I go to the kitchen. So what I try to do is this, I always ask them about their daily life, their daily chores. And if I want to photograph something, I wake up at 4 o'clock and I'm there knocking at their house, at 6 in the morning or something, even before they wake up sometimes, so that I can get the morning light. I can see their daily activities. So it's not, I don't ask them to do certain things from me. I just document what they do generally. But the collaboration is important when it comes to portraits, because the portraits are anonymous. I obscure their identity, so you cannot see. You can see a lot of light that I use. Light and shadows are very important. So yes, it's a collaborative process. Sometimes I ask them, how do you want to stand? How do you want to look? Do you want to hold something in your hand? So of course I ask them. And also I just missed explaining about this point, that in the daily life, if you look at my work on sex trafficking, there are a lot of daily life images, photographs in that piece. Again, I took the photograph in such a way that you cannot see their faces.
And for example, in images where maybe they're taken a little bit further, but you do see you do see people. So for example, the photo on the boat or photos in the streets, how can you are you able to let people know that what the project is about? How do you navigate when it's not necessarily a portrait, but when there's many people in the photograph?
I think it's very important to show how the place looks like. Um, if you're talking, for example, again, I'm giving the same example from the same project of sex trafficking. If you talk about, if you look at my, project about that, there is a particular photograph from a festival called Durga Puja, which is, a very big festival in the region from where girls are trafficked. And it was important for us to show how people enjoy their life, what is the daily life, what is a festival like, the street scene, because sometimes somebody who might sit in Denmark or somebody who's sitting in some other country might want to see how does this region look like. You just don't want to look at the person's house, inside the house, but you also want to see what is the situation that made them leave that place, escape that place, or why did the girl get trafficked in the first place. So it's important to show that. And captions are important. The information that you share in the captions are always very important. So you have to be specifically writing right that this is the scene from this place. Or if you're showing a landscape of a beautiful hill and people walking down the tea gardens, for example, you have to, and suppose there's a lot of problems happening there, you're working on some issue, it's important to show that entire landscape. Yeah, and you can always write in the caption that this is how the region looks like, and this region is known for this problems.
I think captions are really important because they give an image. They can be some subjectivity within it, but I think the captions are really there to give more context and more information. And yeah. So now moving on to maybe issues of representation. Now there's a lot of discussion around dignity. And I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about what dignity means to you and how important it is in your practice.
So I always ask myself one question, when I'm photographing any place, doesn't matter which country or wherever I'm working. If I'm working with some people, I ask that if I was in this situation, or if some of my family member was in this situation, would I have photographed them in this way? When you think about your own family members, it gives you that context as to how I want them to be represented. And I use that in my photography. Whether doesn't matter, even if it's about acid attack, if it's the worst, situation that people can be. If I'm going there and if working on something, it's important to show what's happening. But I think even if you're showing somebody who has got burnt, or somebody who has been beaten up badly, if there is some physical abuse, domestic abuse that you're documenting, there's a certain way that we can show people. it's important. But having said that, I think it's important to show the scars. It's important to sometimes show the reality. But again, it's a very gray area, I would say. It's even the angle is important. From which angle are you shooting? Are you looking down? Is it the same eye level, or are you bending down to show them in an elevated level? Even that makes a lot of difference.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And maybe to play devil's advocate, I would ask, when you said you try to ask yourself, would I want to be portrayed in this situation? And I wonder if dignity is universal, or if it's subjective. If we can really put ourselves into other people's shoes, try to think about how they would like.
Yeah, and it's also about, I think, every individual's upbringing, how you're raised, and what is your attitude in life. If you're going somewhere, as a hunter, that I want to get these images because I want to get some award, or I want to, be published in XYZ magazine. If that's the aim, I think it shows in your photograph. But if you really care, it shows in your photographs. You can tell. um, you know uh, what was the exact feeling while you were taking this photograph. You can actually look at the image and you can tell, I think. And personally, for me, dignity is very important. Dignity and representation, how I am representing the people, because I think people do us a favor by allowing us to photograph them. As a photographer, if people tell me no, I'm nothing. I come back with zero. And I think it's very important to remember that.
Do you think the aesthetics of an image, do you think it's right to really aim for a very beautiful image? And what does that mean?
There's a difference between a strong, good photograph, and there's a difference between a good looking photograph. Some photographs, if you look at it, you might just look away, and then you have to look back to understand the layers in that, the meaning. You have to study the photograph. And there are some images that just shock you, and sometimes that is required. I'm just going to give one example, which shocked, I think, the entire world, and it shocked me too. The photograph of the Syrian boy who was washed ashore, Alan Kurdi, I think I'm pronouncing his name correct. That photograph was, the leading photograph in most of the newspapers, and this photograph, gave a lot of, required attention to the crisis happening in Syria and to the crisis of the people leaving that country because of war and trying to seek, shelter in some other countries. So I think a photograph like that is also important, because yes, representation, dignity, everything else is important. But a photograph like that, if you don't take it, people will not know about what's happening, you know.
No, you're
Yeah.
right. Right. So I think we are coming to the end of this conversation, just so we have time for question. I do want to ask you one final question. Is so to close this conversation, are there anything that you would like to leave your audience with, people who are listening, around recommendation about how to take more ethical images? Or maybe also for people who use images, who don't necessarily take images, but people who commission photographers or who use images.
Commission photographs. Sometimes I do get assignments from different countries, and sometimes they don't understand the region, the problems, the terrain. So they have a list of things that they want, and they'll just give you 2 days. And sometimes they don't understand that just to get there, it can take 4 to 5 hours. And then, you need a certain light to work with. In photography, light is very important. Even if you carry some lights with you, you cannot shoot at noon. 2 o'clock in the hot summer, you can't get a good photograph unless and until you're indoors and using some lights. So these are things that people who commission need to be mindful about that. If you're sending someone, you have to understand about the region, and how long it can take to sensitively work on a certain story. Because you can't just go and ask them, can you tell me, how does your husband beat you up? You cannot just go to someone and ask certain questions like that. You need to build that relationship, you know and if she says yes, then you can take the photograph. So these are things I think, of course, there are a lot of editors and there are a lot of people who commission who understand that, because they have been working on it for a long time, so they do understand. But there have been certain situations where I have faced some things where I thought it was physically just not possible, just to do it in a day or two.
Maybe just a final follow-up question. Do you think editors or NGOs that you're working with and that have commissioned you, do you think there's a change in that they're increasingly understanding this time issue?
They are. I think it's getting better, and also, there's one thing, that I'm seeing a little change, but I hope this change happens more. Why do you have to send someone from Italy or Germany to come to South Asia and work on something very sensitive or difficult when there are so many photographers from this region who can do not just equally, but I would say better job? The reason why I'm saying better job is not just in terms of photography, but they know the language, they know the culture, they know the local nuances. And I think nuances is very important in photography. Sometimes we just miss it, and that's the element that gives spark in the photography. So I hope, people engage more people from within the region, and there's more and more stories of that are produced from here.
Well, that's a good message to leave our audience with. So thank you so much, Smita, and take care.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you. Thanks so much.
That was it. That was my conversation with Smita. We're now coming back to the Q&A. Thank you so much for sharing your questions in the chat. There's already a good number to get us started. We have 20 minutes left, so maybe Smita, if you are, I know there's lots to talk about for each question, but if you can keep them fairly succinct. So I'll take them in order. We have one from Rosalind, who is asking about taking images to protect the identity of the participants, but not doing so necessarily from a post-editing perspective, in terms around how, when you're there, how do you, maybe use lighting in the scene to protect their identity. And she's asking this question specifically from a non-professional photographer perspective, if there's any basic tips that you would have for her.
Sorry, I was muted. I did not realize it. So most of the work that I have shown, where you could see some of the anonymous portraits, they were not done in post-production. Again, in photojournalism, in our industry, we are not allowed to do certain things. Overly retouching images, moving parts of elements from an image, that's a no-no. We have certain guidelines that we have to follow, because this is under our ethics. Because we are not fine art photographers, where you could do a lot of collages, you could do certain things. I don't work like that. So most of the photographs that you see, if you go to my website, or if you just Google my name, and if you look at the work, or even if you look at the Nat Geo work that I've done, I took the photographs the way they are shown. They were just slightly contrasted later on, but nothing has been changed. So I use very tiny lights, and I use anything that's possible within the ground. For example, if I'm going to somebody's house and the room is really dark, most of the villages sometimes, their rooms are really dark, and there's just one window that is open. So I would use perhaps that window as the background, and I would make the person that I want to photograph stand in front of the window with her back, so that I can get a kind of halo, but the face would be dark. And perhaps I would use a spotlight to maybe highlight her hair or maybe her arms or her hands. And sometimes I also use anything that's available in the location. For example, this glass of water, you know, I sometimes I use this. I have used a lot of glass of water. I would shoot through this sometimes just to create a kind of transparent kind of layer. So there's one photograph that you have seen from my project Not My Shame, where there's a girl, there's a greenish kind of background and she's looking straight at you and you can see those crisscross across her face. That was a saran wrap that we used to cover our food. So I was carrying a sandwich and I had to take a photograph and I just could not think of anything. So I took my sandwich out, I put out the saran wrap, I cleaned it, and then, because it was crumpled, it created that effect. And I put a light on the saran wrap and then I shot through it. So it's about being creative. Um, it's about improvisation. How do you improve something by whatever you have? Because sometimes things are very difficult in the regions that I work with. I cannot carry a lot of gear with me because I don't want to come across as a photographer, to protect myself and also to protect the people that I'm photographing. I always keep a low profile when I'm working in the field. So my gadgets and my gear are mostly minimal.
Great, thank you, Smita. Good to know the behind the scenes. A question from Katie. Can photography be empowering for the people who are photographed?
Very good question. I think yes. Many people that I have photographed, not just in my country, but also in other regions, and on very difficult people who have gone through a lot. Because I build a rapport with them and I speak to them, at the end, I've had people tell me that nobody speaks to me, nobody talks to me as though I'm untouchable, as though I've done something wrong. And I really liked talking to you. Thank you for just talking to me normally. So I think it's a very cathartic process, not just for the person but also for me. It's kind of a healing process, and I think they feel empowered. I've had girls tell me where that, I was stupid, I fell into the trap, and this is what happened to me. I'm sharing my story because I don't want anyone else to go through what I've been through. So they know that their stories can help other people.
Yeah. Question from Megan about donating things or item to the people you photograph. So you mentioned donating the clothes. Is there a line where do you have to draw a line about what kinds of things you donate, or maybe even money or things? Do you have a perspective on that?
Very important question. Very, very important question. Yes, it's against the practice of journalism to do certain things and to build that kind of bridge and not to cross that bridge. If people are willingly talking to you, if they're inviting you to their homes and you're spending hours and hours, because I spend a lot of time with them, and sometimes people are really poor, they give you the best food. Sometimes they don't go to work, they lose out on that day's money. So as a token of thank you, I could take food for them. If that lady has a baby, uh, I would perhaps buy baby food or take maybe diapers, because she will not be able to buy afford diapers. So these kind of things are okay. But if, again, the line that I'm talking about not crossing is, if you are promising them that I'm going to help you and you will get a lot of donations if you tell me your story, if you allow me to photograph, you are giving them false hope, you are lying to them, and you're bribing them. That's a kind of bribe. I think that is unethical. That is absolutely no. So these kind of things is against journalism. You cannot do that. You cannot offer money to get access. You cannot give them false promises to get access. That is no. But when I said about sharing those pieces of clothes that were left over, because the women spent a lot of time with us, they were sharing, they were chatting with us. In the end, we just asked them, do you like something from here? If you like, then pick up something. And they all took it. And I think that's fair. There's nothing wrong in it. At the end of the day, we are all human, right? They're giving their time to us, so there's nothing wrong in giving them something as a token. But false promises and bribing is not done.
Yeah, absolutely. A few questions that relate to taking images of certain vulnerable groups. So there's one from Humanity and Inclusion, who is asking, how is the ethics of photographing people with disabilities? Do you have any experience of this? And if yes, do you have to focus on their disabilities or vulnerability side? Or do you focus more on the empowerment aspect?
So, it depends on the angle of your story. I've not worked a lot, but I've worked a little bit on blindness. This was about a woman who was raped, and she was blind. So my subject was about sexual violence, and uh, sexual violence done to somebody with disability. So it was different. But again, if you're talking about, for example, people with cleft lips, how they are bullied in schools, or you're talking about that. So again, the story is different, the angle of the story is different. So it depends on what you want to do with your story. What is your focus? What is your aim? Ultimately, what are you trying to do with your story? If it's somebody with a handicapped, or somebody who cannot, uh, somebody who is on the wheelchair, but you're doing about a sports, and that person goes to watch the sports and wants to play. If it's a story like that, then how are you going to represent that, or how are you going to show as to what are the things this person hopes to do but cannot do? So it depends on the storyline, really.
And the following question is around working with survivors of sexual violence. And the person says, one thing we always discuss is how responsible it is to engage directly with survivors of sexual violence. What should, in your view, be the threshold for such engagement? With your images, you reach many people, and with money, you can do things. But how do we assess if it's worth for a survivor to engage with us?
So I think I mentioned this in my presentation, about being honest, and sharing why you are there, being very truthful about your ultimate aim. And it depends on the person what she wants to share with you, she or he, because men are also sexually abused. So are they comfortable sharing it with you? Do they not want to show their face? Are they okay to come on video and give an interview where you can record their audio but not show their face? So there are different things that you have to ask. It depends on the person, really. And when you mention about money, I really did not understand about money, because people like us don't really make money. We do it because of our passion, because we care, and but having said that, I have had a lot of people reach out to me on my Instagram, on different social media, asking me, because when I put up any kind of post or any images, I have people asking me, how do we help? I want to do something, so what I do is that I give them directly. I ask them to email me, and then I ask them, what is it that you want to do? Do you want to sponsor their education? Do you want to buy the school uniform, or do something for them? So when people say that specifically, I want to do this, I get them in touch directly with the families. I'm just a medium, I don't take money. The families receive the money directly in their bank, and if they don't have a bank, there is some nonprofit, local nonprofit, who's working with them. So I would link the donors with them so that they get the help. Yeah. And the satisfaction that I get is people reaching out to me wanting to help, because they care and they've read the story, they've seen the story.
Right. And now working with children, do you have any experience of that? And if so, what your perspectives are on protecting their identity, developing a relationship, and respecting their dignity? Is it different when you work with children?
It's different, absolutely, because of the law. You're working with minors, they're below 18. So what is it you're working on? Is it on child labor? Is it on child sex trafficking? Because I worked on child sex trafficking for the Nat Geo piece. And Alice, if you could share that link, if people can see that work, would be great. um, so there are certain things that you have to be aware of, no matter where you're working in this world. In the region that I worked, this was India and Bangladesh, particularly in India, there's a law called POCSO, Protection of Children Against Sexual Offences Act. So you have to know the law before you actually work on it, and the law says that you cannot publish any material that identifies the minor, whether it's a photograph, whether it's a street address, whether it's some kind of information within the story that gives some kind of information about the person. So we had to be very careful when we worked on it. The images, some of the images that you see, they are of minors, but they were published after they became 18. So the work is not, the work is almost 3 years, kind of assignment. And we had to verify each girl's birth, date of birth, whether they were 18 before we were publishing it. And you have to take permission from their parents. If you are photographing children, the parents have to give consent, and you need a written consent for all of that, So they have to sign the model release, which is very important. If somebody is above 18, it's different, but if somebody is a minor, then yes. And on top of that, if you're working on something really sensitive, you have to abide by the laws. You have to see what are the do's and don'ts, what you cannot do, because you cannot break the law of, certain region, certain countries where you're working, because the laws are different from countries to countries. Yeah.
So now, moving on to a question about working in crowded places. So, for example, if you're working in a refugee camp or in a war zone, how can you protect people's dignity and what will be their concerns?
So concern would be, as I said, not to single them out. If you're going to a camp, a refugee camp, and for example, the Rohingya problem, if you're going to there, I mean, how do you photograph someone? Do you photograph somebody taking a shower from the back? Just to show the poverty. I mean, I worked a lot on sex trafficking, and I worked on the red light areas, with the sex workers. I did not show any skin. It was not important for me to show, sex workers with the clients, because that's very cliched, and I think this is what comes to our mind all the time. And why do we have to show that? It's not important. There are other ways to show a story. There are other ways to show refugees. There are other ways to show the crowd. If you're showing a cramped up situation where people are surviving, you have to show that. Having said that, you have to show the refugee camp. You have to show the living conditions. But there are certain things that I wouldn't do. I wouldn't show somebody taking a shower half semi-naked just to show their poverty and everything else. That's me. Yeah.
And sort of relatedly, now when you're working in these sorts of situations where you don't have much time, are there any other rules for consent? I mean, obviously you wouldn't have much time to build a conversation. Do you have any views about that?
I think the model release is important, because for most of my work, I always get people to sign the model release. If they cannot sign, if they don't know, I take a thumb impression. I do that. Sometimes if you're not carrying a model release, you can just record the consent, as a video on your phone. These are just quick methods of doing it. There are also some apps, I think, where you can take model releases of people, on your phone. I think even that's possible. I don't do it, but there are people who do it. I don't know if I answered that correct. Was this the question?
Yes. I'm just conscious of time now. There's quite a few more questions, so I don't know what your availability is, Smita, for 5 minutes past the hour.
I can stay. Yeah, I can stay for a little bit longer. Sure.
Questions. Yeah. Would like to. I mean, we're not going to go much past, but if you have to go, that's absolutely fine. We're recording this.
No, I'm fine. That's fine.
Great, excellent. So where were we at? Yes, a really interesting question by Leonor. How would you protect the identity of a sexual abuse survivor who wants her portrait taken and identity revealed, although this could pose a risk to her safety?
So again, the question is whether she's a minor or a major. If she's a minor, I would not. Even if she would say yes, I would not show her identity. You know, um, just to make her feel good, perhaps I would take a photograph where her face is seen, and I would show it at the back of the camera. And I've done it with some of the girls, when I was working on sex trafficking, girls that I met at the girls' shelter. There are some girls who said, "You can show my face, I don't care," but they were minors, and I could not. It would just not be. It could pose a lot of risk. It was just against the law. So if she's a major, if people have the right to vote, they also have the right to say what they want. So if that person is a major, and if she thinks that I have nothing to be ashamed of, you can show my face, then it is okay. But then again, if you think that there is a security issue, perhaps there's a court case that is going and she's a witness. Perhaps she has to go to court. And then if she's identified, she could be threatened, she could be physically assaulted. So there are situations that could come up like that. I'm just giving this as an example. So I think it's our responsibility to explain those situations. Just tell her that, you know what, I'm really scared because I think this could happen. Are you really sure? Are you really sure that you want to be seen, or you want me to photograph you this way? I think it's just communication that has to be transparent.
Okay. A different kind of questions, but it's from Sphere Communications. Do you have any basic tips for NGO comms people who often need to take pictures but are not professionals, aside of
Hire
technical requirements? Obviously,
hire people like us. We will do a good job. That's why we are working.
Is that? Do you have any? Is that your
tips?
main
No, I was just joking.
That's absolutely fine.
You know, that's a whole range of photography. You can't ask a doctor that give us some tips about certain things. Maybe get your comms people, whoever you think could go and take photographs, get them to attend some photography workshop at least. I cannot answer it in a 5-minute question. It's not possible. Workshops are important. If they can take a basic photography workshop, I think it could be helpful.
But often these workshops don't necessarily focus on, what you've been talking about today, the ethics.
No, there are workshops. I take workshops also, and I have some of my friends and colleagues who equally take very good workshops on visual storytelling, on sensitive issues, on these topics. So I think there are workshops available that anyone can take, really, and especially now with the virtual world, you don't have to go anywhere. Sitting at home, you can take some workshops.
And your perspective as a photographer on, the rise of stock images.
Oh my God. That is that's another, I think, Zoom, that could be another Zoom conversation, a separate topic. Well, again, it's about representation. You're talking about child labor. Maybe your work is about the gold mines, mining of certain whatever, coal or gold or diamond. You're talking about that. Maybe some country in Africa, and you don't want to send somebody to go and actually see it. Perhaps the reason is it's too risky to send somebody there. You will not get access or something, and then you just go to Getty or you go to some other these photo stock images, and you look for a representational images. So you use those to demonstrate something which is not the real, but not the real situation. I think it's not that effective, really, because people want to see what's happening, really. I don't think it's really effective. It really doesn't touch you because it's somewhere else taken.
Yeah, fair enough. Question on ownership of images. Can you comment on ownership of images, your ownership, commissioning organization, question mark?
Yeah, very, very, very important. And this is very important for the development sector, because there are some organizations, they have a shared copyright as to you share the copyright with the organization that is sending you, So you are free to exhibit your work, you're free to show your work and have it on your website and do some things. Most of the time, how we work is the copyright is ours, And the copywriters ask, but the whoever is sending us, the agency, the nonprofit who is sending us, we give them an edit which they use for their communication, for any kind of their events, for their hoardings, their banners, their websites, maybe their annual magazines that they come out with, or maybe they can use it in their conference. Everyone comes with their own agenda, with different things that they require. So sometimes it's a total buyout. For example, they just send you, you get the work, you give them the work, and it's their copyrights, it's their ownership. So then the day rate changes. So then if it's a total buyout, it's more expensive. You have to pay the photographer well enough, because you're taking that away from him or her. Yeah.
So beyond talking about ownership of images, it's a question about the different kinds of clients that you work with. Smita, do you find different clients in different markets have different expectations, especially in terms of the drama, the shock? As we see
Yes.
more and more photojournalism via social media, etc., do people expect more shocking images?
Uh, Very difficult kind of question in a way, because it's very difficult to talk about people in general. For example, anything that happens at the beginning, for example, the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was wanting to look at the doctors, the equipment, the PPE. And now, people are just too exhausted and tired. I'm not sure how many people go through the images, or what's happening now. So again, it's about call to action. It's about the urgency. When the Rohingya, situation happened, it was such an important thing that was happening, and people were shocked. And slowly and slowly, now we don't talk about Rohingya so much, and it's not that they are not suffering. Perhaps it's a worse situation right now. There are people on the ground who are working, but we don't know what's happening, because it's not so much in the limelight, right? Or for example, the Nepal earthquake, people have forgotten about the earthquake. But are people not suffering? They are. You know, they are still, the nation is still building up. So it's about the urgency, I think. And shocking images, I think it's important. Certain things it's important to see, because you need to know what's happening, and you need to bring that urgency. You need people to see, to understand what's happening. Yeah.
Right. So it's almost 5 past. I've been firing questions at you. I'll just ask you one last one, which is about, your own experience being a photographer. As a photographer and a woman, how do you integrate psychologically and emotionally the difficult stories that are shared with you? The toll on the photographer.
Ah. So if I say that I'm not moved, then I would be a robot, but I'm a human. So yes, there are situations when I really get moved. It's difficult for me to just digest sometimes as to what is happening in front of me. I'm Again, I just want to give this example that happened a few years back. I was in a hospital, and there was a girl who was burnt, and I was allowed by her family inside the burnt ward. And the moment I entered, I saw her in that cask, and she was 80% burnt. Her face was completely burnt. I was so shocked that I almost felt breathless. I felt I was just going to get knocked. And I just turned, and I just took a deep breath, and I just took out my camera, and I just started looking through the camera, because sometimes I feel the camera acts as a shield. Because the moment you take it down from your face, you feel that you are faced with reality. But when you have the camera, it's almost like a protective field. It's something that photographers deal with a lot. So I feel the camera is helps you keep focus and be objective while you are there. But the the only time that I really emote, that I feel something, is when I'm back, perhaps in this room. This is where I work, at my workstation. When I'm downloading the images, I'm looking at the images alone at night. That's my time that I'm spending with the images. That's the time that it really hits me. That's the time that I really feel that emotion. And how do I cope with it? I think having a supportive family is very important. I have some close friends, some friends who are just not from the photography community, because I just want to talk anything and everything with them, you know. So I just think it's important to have a support system around you, and that's what keeps me working, I think. Yeah.
And that is part of the ethics of photography as well, is the
Hmm.
impact
Hmm.
on the photographer, and having, you know, the support in place to support photographers.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful, Smita. I hope, you know, that wasn't too many questions down your end. You've answered them all, um, you know, beautifully. So thanks for your contributions. I will just share my screen.
Thank you for having me. And I just want to thank everyone for participating and for your questions. I don't know how much I could answer, um, but can people hear me still, Alice?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So if anyone has any question, feel free to drop me a line on my Instagram or Twitter, or also on my website. There's a place where you can, you know, send me any kind of query or questions. I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Great. Yes, and thanks to all the audience. The questions were brilliant. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to answer them all. But as Smita said, you can contact her. I've shared the details here online, and do keep in mind that we have a few talks coming up, and you can email me if you'd like to sign up to the mailing list. So thank you, everyone, and in particular to Smita for her brilliant
Thank you.
conversation and Q&A.
Thanks for having me. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.